Good morning. Today we are wrapping up our series. Anyone out there? And a couple weeks ago, Nikki, she kicked it off and she opened up with a statement that I've just been replaying in my mind a lot. We're humans. It's part of the human experience to evolve, to grow, to change. But God doesn't. God is consistent. The same God who worked in your life before is the same God who's going to work in your life again. But how do we remember that? How do we cling to that truth when we feel like we are dragging ourselves through the trenches? Today, we are talking about pain and perspective. And Mike always gives me the emo sermons, and I'm usually happy for it because, I grew up in the angsty 99 to early 2000s. But this one, I've been feeling it, you guys. So I tend to get emotional on stage, if you don't know that already. And I would like to say today, it's not going to happen. But if and when it does happen, you're just going to have to work through that with me. And just know it is because I'm not talking at you. This message, I have been living it for the past 40 days. I have been going through it. I am tired. I am worn out. But thankfully, just like our namesake verse in Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, if you are tired, if you're worn out, if you're burnt out, you can find rest in him. And thank God, Christ has sustained me. What I had to relearn was what happens in the unseen doesn't always transpire the same in the physical. So, my eyes might well up, my voice might start to shake, but my mind is good. My heart is light. And I think that's a good reminder of what Paul writes in Ephesians 6:12, because we often think that the things that we're fighting through is just the tangible things that we see every single day that we're dealing with that are right in front of us. But Paul writes that no, the real battle is in the unseen. So with that being said, would you join me in prayer? God, thank you for this space. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to gather together, Lord. Let it be you today. Let eyes be open to see. Let ears be open to hear. Let hearts be open to receive, God. And if anybody walks away with anything here, let it be you. Let it be you. And let them glorify your great name, Jesus. Amen. All right, we're going to start this off super transparent, okay? I'm going to tell you all the bad things about me so that, we have a relationship here. All right, so some of my major flaws that I kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis. One, I'm impatient. I wish it wasn't so. I'm super impatient. Two, I hate surprises. Cute, little surprises, I was thinking of you. I don't care about that. That's great. I love that. But surprises of being put in a situation that I didn't plan for, hate, super uncomfortable. I'm a planner. Three, I like what I like, and I want what I want, and sometimes that's impractical. And so I've kind of learned to just depend on myself. You know that old saying, if you want it done right, you do it yourself. And that gets kind of lonely. And I'm not going to, fish for relatability, because even if you don't, relate to me on all three, you got one of those. Likely, you got one of those. But probably my worst trait is an accumulation of all three of those, a result of it, and that is that I tend to get in the way of God. And then when I get in the way of God, I get mad. I get sad. I pray out, why aren't you doing anything? Because my perspective is consistently distracted by what's in front of me. It's skewed, and as a result, I recognize that there have been times that I have either missed out on or definitely delayed what God would have for me. Now, speaking of bad habits, here's a fun one. So I am really bad at packing my lunch the night before work. And I can't do it the day of, it's just not happening. Trying to get a Puerto Rican out of the door on time, if any of you had to meet with my husband, it just doesn't happen, okay? So realistically, I should do it the night before. But what happens is, A, I don't remember, don't think of it, or two, I lie to myself. I'm like, girl, set your alarm a little bit earlier. You'll be fine. You know what you're packing. Never happens. And I don't have one of those jobs where you can just leave for lunch. I need to be there, so I have to pack a lunch. And if I don't, I'm hungry throughout the day. I'm never starving because I have snacks on stock. But I am thinking about food at 10 a.m. And so I'm usually texting my husband, what's the dinner plan? And Joel's a good cook. And so sometimes he has these rich, decadent, good meals to look forward to. He'll be chicken and arroz con habichuelas. And I'm cool. And just thinking about it sustains me throughout the day. I'm like, I can't wait to get home to a really good meal. I'm fine. The hours go by. I'm not dreading it until 5 p.m. My car is edging that parking lot to leave for work. And I'm like, this drive is 25 minutes long. If there's traffic, that's another 10 minutes. And like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I'm so hungry. What if I pass out while I drive? And the only reason I'm thinking that is because right across the street, staring me in my eyes, is a temptress. And her name is Chick-fil-A. And what I start thinking is like, well, what I'll do is I'll just get like one plain spicy chicken sandwich. Spicy because I read in a science article that if your food is spicy, it builds your metabolism. So science. One spicy chicken sandwich, and then I'll go home and I'll eat a lighter portion of dinner, and then I'll have the rest packed for lunch tomorrow. It's brilliant, right? No, it's not brilliant, because sometimes it's Chick-fil-A, but sometimes it's her dirty neighbor, Taco Bell. And when you go to Taco Bell, you get more bang for your buck. And so then I start like stretching this lie to myself, and I indulge a little bit more. So there I am, ready for my 30-minute adventure home, looking like a hobgoblin over my Crunchwrap Supreme, trying to steer my steering wheel. You got to get the hot sauce in there, inhaling it. And then by the time I get home, I'm so guilty that I'm like crunching the bag up, hoping Joel doesn't see me. He's looking at me right now. So he's like, this is new information. Putting it into the garbage. And then I'm like, I don't know why I'm not hungry. Man, intermittent fasting does work. Now, I can't say this for certain. It's not in the Bible. But I am 98% sure that is not the meal the Lord would have for me, okay? Because there was an opportunity here. There was an opportunity to sit in the comfort of my own home, at a table with a plate, not to feel rushed or uncomfortable, to enjoy and savor food that was actually nourishing to my body. And listen, Taco Bell is not falling on the nourishment scale. I lie to myself, but not that much, okay? But the minute I turn my attention to my discomfort, or more serious issues, like to my problems, to my pain, my perspective shifted to everything wrong. And I instantly am trying to do everything in my own power to fix something that was already resolved for me. Now, I don't want to make too light of this topic today. We had some fun. But the truth is, many of us in this room are struggling. Many of us are sad. We're spiritually or emotionally starved. We're desperate. Some of us have been waiting for God to work a miracle in our lives so much that we're giving up on God. Some of us have been in physical pain for so long that our hearts are numb to faith. Some of us have been counting on that change in our relationship for so long that our homes have become just this mundane place to exist. And some of us have been praying for that loved one to kick that addiction for so long that we're starting to think sobriety isn't coming earth side, it's going to come heaven side. And we look at other people and we're like, they have a good story. They have a glittery bow on top. Like, look what God did, and we love that for them. But what about us? What about when it doesn't go that way for us? Some of us are depressed or despondent, and we are disappointed because we don't know, is God even working here? And then amidst that pain and that suffering, we end up in a deep, dark place. And they say, experience, it breeds wisdom, right? It breeds character, it sharpens faith, and all of that is true. But how do you remember that when you're going through it? There are plenty of stories in the Bible of pain, of waiting. Job, Moses and the Israelites, Elijah, Jeremiah, Jonah. Today, we are going to walk through the incredible journey of the Shunammite woman. So if you have a Bible, you can open up to 2 Kings 4:15. If not, don't worry. It'll be on the screen and you can follow along. So I'm going to give you some context because we're going to meet a few characters here. One is Elisha. So he's an esteemed Hebrew prophet in the Old Testament, and he was called man of God. He carried out 16 miracles, many of which are repeated on a grander scale in the New Testament by God incarnate, which is Jesus. And this story opens in verse 8. Elisha and his servant Gehazi, they're like missionaries, they travel through towns. And we meet the Shunammite woman. She's wealthy. She is the hostess of the mostest. And she sees Elisha and she recognizes him as a man of God. And she tells her husband, you know what? When he travels through, we should make a room for him. She was already opening her home to him and feeding him warm meals. But this one, she was like, let's make a room for him so he and his servant have a place to rest when they're traveling through. And one day, Elisha is laying there and he's like, we got to repay this woman for her graciousness. Like, what can we do for her? And she insists nothing. She is selfless. She's healthy. She's wealthy. She loves her community. She loves her life. She loves her husband. She is good. And he's like, no, there's got to be something. And Gehazi, his servant's like, well, I mean, her husband's old and she doesn't have a child. And so that's where we open up in verse 15. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. So we're going to pause here. See, this woman, she lived a life of contentment. And in all of that contentment, in all of her blessings, she understood that she just wasn't going to be blessed with a child. And so when Elisha says this, she's like, don't joke. That's not funny. Like, don't get my hopes up. Don't say something that's not going to happen. Verse 17. But the woman became pregnant, and the next year, about the same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. The child grew, and one day he went out to his father, who was with the reapers, and he said to his father, my head, my head. And his father told the servant, carry him to his mother. After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up, laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door, and went out. She called her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and a donkey so I can go to the man of God quickly and return. Why are you going to him today? He asked. It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. That's all right, she said. I want to pause here. Let's just talk about what the woman didn't do, okay? What I would have done. Cling to the child in agony. Scream out to her husband in desperation. Sob uncontrollably on the floor. Slip into a deep depression. Instead, she takes her child, that sweet boy who was a miracle of life, who is now limp and unalive, and she lays him on the bed of the man of God. And then she goes to her husband, and all she says is like, fetch me a donkey so I can go straight to the man of God. He's like, why? It doesn't make sense. She's like, that's all right. Then she had to ride about 25 miles on donkey to this man. So I had to look up how long that would take, and all I could find is like how long it would take to ride 25 miles on horseback, depending on the terrain. That would take a full day. So that's 2 days, maybe a little bit more on a donkey, round trip, as her son, now dead, is laying on that bed. Talk about faith amidst patience and pain in a desperate situation. Verse 24. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on. Don't slow down for me unless I tell you. So she set out, came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her. Ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? And Gehazi does that, and she's like, everything's all right. This woman has no time for distractions, okay? She is going straight to the man of God. Gehazi, he's a servant to Elisha, and even when he steps in and is like, what can I do to help? She's like, She knows that this is a problem that can only be solved by the power of God. Power of man can do nothing here. Verse 27. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She's in bitter distress. But the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt. Take my staff in your hand and run. Don't greet anyone you meet. And if anyone greets you, you do not answer. Lay my staff on that boy's face. But the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So Elisha got up and followed her. I not only need the faith of this Shunammite woman, I need her dependency on God. See, she put herself in the right influence, okay? She put herself in an environment where she had access to people who were influenced by the man of God, okay? So she had access to Gehazi. You're here today, you have access to me. You have access to Colleen, you have access to Mike, you have access to Nikki. And hopefully you have other faithful people in your life that you have access to, and that's beautiful. It's amazing, it's necessary, okay? But there is a subtle difference between reliance and dependency. Reliance is to have trust in, to have confidence in. But dependence, that is something you need. You need in order to function, to grow, to move forward. You can rely on us, but we are humans just like you. We cannot and we should not rest our dependency in each other. That needs to be in God. Verse 31, Gehazi went on ahead, laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and told him, the boy has not awakened. Well, that's because it's a God-sized problem, Gehazi. Now, I need you to bear with me because it's about to get a little weird, and I need you to remember that this was written around 560 BC, okay? So things, different people, different times. All right, and we need to just take a little note and store it. Back then, if an Israelite touched a dead body, you were made unclean, okay? That's a no-no. And Elisha is about to be eye to eye, nose to nose, chest to chest with a dead body. He's going to be made unclean when he's a man of God. Now, this is reminiscent of what happens later. It's prophetic of what happens later in the New Testament, what Jesus does for us on the cross. Verse 32, when Elisha reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and he prayed to the Lord. He got on the bed. He laid on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. He stretched himself out on him, and the boy's body grew warm. But that's it. Elisha turned away, walked back and forth in the room. Then he got on the bed, stretched out on him once more, and that boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. And he did. And when she came, he said, take your son. She came in, fell at his feet, bowed to the ground. She took her son and went out. She came in. She fell at his feet. She bowed to the ground before picking up her son, who is now alive again. We are so anxious to snatch a miracle right out of God's hands that we forget to say thank you first. We forget where it came from. By stepping out and going straight to the man of God, the Shunammite woman got so much more that day than she would have by turning inward and wallowing in her pain, okay? She saw life rise from the dead. She saw hope. This intangible thing become more than just words, more than a state of mind. It became alive. She could touch it. She could feel it. Her life would go on to be more full, not only because she got to continue to raise her son, who was a miracle himself, but because of this story. The first thing we got to do when entering the struggle, first, run to God. In the struggle, we have to depend on God. It may take days, it may take weeks, months, years. You might need to lay that down on the bed of God and continue on through your life, but you have to trust that God will show you who he is. And then when you're approaching the rainbow, the storm's starting to end, the clouds are dissipating, you better thank God. Better praise God. We get real comfortable in our miracles. They lose their zest over time. We want something shinier, newer, brighter, bigger. Or what was once so miraculous, something we once prayed for that we were so thankful for, it just becomes mundane. And we're living with it day in and day out. I am sorry to be the one to say this, but God is not going to allow you to be content in your complacency. I'm saying that to myself. God will not allow you to be content in your complacency. God reminded the Shunammite woman that the blessing she received all those years ago, it is still a miraculous blessing today. When you get grateful, you shift your mind. When you pray in the storm, you get out. Now, I'm not saying like your body is going to be out of the pain. I'm not saying your heart is going to be out of the ache, but your perspective is out. God is sustaining your mind because you put your faith and trust in him. Your faith isn't in the hardship. Your faith isn't in the trouble. Your faith is in the one who holds it all. Corinthians 4:18 says, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. What's seen, that's temporary. What's unseen, that's eternal. Perspective. Perspective opens the door to the provision of God. Only in hindsight can we see that today's sorrow is tomorrow's sustenance, and everything can be a gift, right? But you got to open yourself to see it. And I know, it's easier said than done. When you drop the light of hope and you trade it to dwell in the darkness, you are settling for misery. And you know what they say about misery. What do they say? Misery likes what? Misery likes company. And pretty soon your mind is going to reel in your heart. In your heart, it's going to become callous to optimism. It's going to become callous in relationships. Ultimately, your heart is going to become callous to God. And when you have God-sized problems, who are you going to depend on? Now, I said I've been going through it the past 40 days, but that story unfortunately hasn't finished writing itself, so I don't know what's happening there, so we're not going to talk about it yet. I've laid it down on the bed of God, and I'm just walking away. But I know this. God will sustain me, and God will work something, because he's worked in my life plenty of times before. And I have plenty of miracles. Oh, here it comes. I have plenty of miracles I could share, but I'm going to share my favorite one. My brother Kurt, some of you guys know him. He began flirting with vices at just 18 years old. Over the next years, he would kind of walk along the waters of addiction, but not be completely consumed until he was. Throughout the next 12 years of his life, his addiction tested my own faith. I'm ashamed to say that I ended up in a place where I would say I was thriving. I was trusting God. I was sharing God with other people. I was growing in my faith, but when it came to my brother, I just thought well, God's not going to help here. Now, don't misunderstand me. I wasn't like the Shunammite. I didn't take it and leave it on the bed of God. No. I left it there next to the chair where I held it and I screamed and it was dead. And I just thought it died and I left it alone. I fully expected that one day I was going to get a call that said my brother was no longer with us. And last year I got a call, an unexpected phone call from my brother himself. And in his voice, I heard the desperation. And in Kurt's voice, I heard the pain. I heard the shame. And I felt God nudge me into discomfort immediately. And I didn't want to help. I didn't want to help because, what if it doesn't work? I didn't want to help because what if I can't trust him? I didn't want to help because what if it just breaks my heart again and I don't know how this is going to end? And then what if I have to unravel all those feelings I've been sweeping under the rug? God, don't say things that aren't going to happen. Don't promise me promises that you're not going to keep. Don't get my hopes up. Kurt was relying on me, but my dependency rested in God. I had to lie that broken faith on his bed. I had to accept that I didn't know how quick of a journey this was going to be, and I actually didn't know what was going to happen in the end. But I had to trust that the same God who has worked millions of miracles in my life is the same God who can work a miracle in the life of my brother. And you guys, 2 weeks from today, the day that we are sitting in right now, 2 weeks from today, we celebrate Kurt being 1 year sober and giving his life to Jesus. When there's pain and confusion in the waiting, you have to replace it with trust. Kurt's story is still being written. And he says, there's tough days, but he sees the goodness of God in every day. What do you need to lay down in front of God? What dead things are you clinging to? What dead things are you clawing to, even though they no longer have life? Is it your faith? Lay it before God. Watch him raise that from the dead. Is it your relationship? Lay it down. Walk away. Stop dwelling in the dark. Stop speaking heartache over your life and then just say, oh, I'm venting. Go to God. Is it your pain? Lay it down. Don't say you did. Do it. Don't just say, I trust you, God. No, do you? Do you trust God? Although his name is not mentioned in this story, Rabbinic Judaism holds to the traditional belief that Habakkuk is the Shunammite woman's son. Now, Habakkuk, he was a prophet who wrote a very short book in the Bible, and it's unique because he's not speaking to God's people in it. He's speaking directly to God. They're having a conversation. And the message of that book is trust the Lord no matter what. But the kicker is, it's not because he was once, a boy who died and then was risen. It's because he himself, as an adult, as a prophet, struggled with trusting God. He saw God's people going through hardship, and he was like, God, why aren't you doing anything? So the first thing he does in his book is he goes straight to the source, just like his mama, straight to God. And he writes in his book, Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? How long will I raise my voice because of the violence and you will not save? And God responds to him. God says, behold. I love that word. Behold, watch, wait, consider. Behold and regard and wonder marvelously, for a work shall be done in your days of which you will not believe. Habakkuk, he ends his book with a chapter of worship, a prayer of praise. Just like his mother's testimony ends with praise. But the difference is his mother, she got to see that happy ending. Habakkuk, he didn't. He just had to trust that God would deliver. Don't get caught up. Don't get caught up figuring out what the end of your story is because it's still being written. You're living it. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy or it's going to be fun, but it's got to run its course. The chapter, it's going to keep penning away because it's not the end of your book. But you can make it a story of triumph. You can make it a story of hope. You can make it a story that undoubtedly shows God's hand on every single page. Let your story scream faith and praise in God. I want everybody to stand up. Come on, don't be shy. Now I'm going to ask you to get a little close to each other. I want you all to come and gather up front. Just don't cross these little ropes. Come gather up front. If that's too much, then gather in the first rows. Get close to each other. We're going to gather stage center. Listen, maybe you're good right now, but maybe the person who is sitting next to you isn't. Maybe you're feeling fine right now, but you know somebody who is desperate. Maybe you're content, but have you made room for when the day comes and you are hurting, you can lay it down on the bed of God? We're going to pray for all that. So we're about to step into a song, and you're going to sing it, but it's not just a song. It is a prayer. We are not just singing these lyrics. We are going to be praying these lyrics. We are going to be believing these lyrics. We are going to profess them, and we are going to lay them down and say, God, I've seen you do it before, and I want you to do it again. Join me in prayer. God, let us not be distracted by the physical things. Let us not lose hope in who you are. Let us remember you are constant. You are true. You are the same God who has worked a big thing in our lives yesterday, and you're going to do it again tomorrow.